Hi everybody, this is Johnny. I'm going through the Instructional Cycle 1 Rubrics for CalTPA for multiple subject folks. And this may be the most useful of the videos I'm setting out for you. You might want to watch this one first. It helps you think about all the other things you might want to do afterwards. The rubrics are organized this way for each of the steps. Step 1, plan, has 4 rubrics. Step 2, teach and assess, 2 rubrics. Reflect, step 3, 1 rubric. Step 4, 1 rubric. And each of them is scored and has a number of points that goes with each of them, and we'll go into that in detail. So let's get started with that. So the first of the 4 rubrics for step 1 is on planning. And the way I've organized this is focusing on level 3. Level 3 is the score you want to get. You want to get 3 points, at least. You want to try to always get at least 3 points on these. You have some latitude for getting scores of 2, but don't even play with that. So the way I've set out these rubrics is I focus on level 3 with specific things that you need to do, and then I give you advice, direction for how you might move to a 4 or a 5. Now, a big important thing, and do hold on to this, if you were to do all the work necessary to get a 3, look, there's a lot of things to do. Often, it's 1 or 2 more things you might do, not that egregious, not that hard to do, that can move you to a 4 or a 5. You just have to be more specific, and you just have to have particular details in your work that will take you to a 4 or 5. My students, I try to push to level 4 as a starting place, incorporating 3 and 4. So you think about it how you want to, but here's how I've set this one up. So this first one is essential question for step 1 plan. How does the candidate's proposed learning goals connect with prior knowledge and define specific outcomes for students? How do proposed learning activities, instructional and grouping strategies support, engage, and challenge all students to meet the learning goals? Okay, so it's all about learning goals and how they matter. So if we look at level 3 here, there are 9 things that you have to do. Your lesson plan includes manageable and appropriate goals, builds on students' prior content knowledge. Candidate clearly identifies the kinds of evidence they will look for to determine that student met the learning goal, and the assessment they will use to make this determination. The lesson plan includes learning activities that are appropriately supporting, engaging, or challenging for students, and grouping strategies as appropriate. And then this one goes down a little bit further here. Content-specific instructional strategies include modeling and scaffolding that will assist students to reach expectations embedded in the learning activities, including higher order thinking and academic language development. So there's a lot there. Here's the shortcut list I've given you, and you can see I've bolded all of them, so you can use this as some kind of reference too. Every time there's a different color, it's a different requirement. So some paragraphs have 2 things in them. So clear goals are required to get a level 3. Clear reference to prior knowledge, so you need to be using the word prior knowledge somewhere. Describe what counts for successful learning. I will know students will have successfully learned this when they are able to. Describe the formal and informal checks for understanding, if you have exit tickets or if you're going to have check-ins while the kids are working in groups. Activities that make learning happen and grouping if appropriate. So you have to describe what kids are doing, not just yourself. Describe the models you will use. Okay, if you're doing math, what tools might you be using? If you're doing writing, are you doing some kind of co-writing? Describe scaffolds to support learning. Describe moves to make higher order thinking happen, and do use that term. Describe moves to encourage academic language development. Do use that term. Now here's the important thing. You want to make sure you have every one of these. And there's not much latitude. The way I understand CalTPA scoring is if any of these is significantly absent, like if it's very plain that you did not say anything about scaffolds, you can't get a 3. If you don't say anything about the models you're using to teach, then it's going to be a 3. It's going to be a 2, which I don't even have showing here. So any one of these, every one of these has to show up. So you might think about framing your work so that you say, I'm going to hit all 9 of these. using the terms that are there so it's plainly evident that I'm addressing the things that count for rubric 1. You may have the best lesson plan ever, and everything shows really great, but if you did not write about one of these blocks, you cannot get a 3, which is the score that you should be shooting for. So everyone has to show up. Now, what I've offered you also is do all of these 9 things, and then come over here and look at this. Candidate's lesson plan provides a detailed explanation of proposed instructional adaptations and accommodations to support focus students. So, to move up to a 4, make sure your plans clearly describe how you will make your lesson work for your 3 focus students. And as I've said before in other videos, a short paragraph for each with specific accommodation. Okay? For my English learner, I will be doing this as an accommodation support. Every one of those 3 focus students. That's how you move from a 3 to a 4. Now, sometimes they're harder to do, okay? To get a level 5 on this first rubric, you need to be talking about UDL. So you'd have to investigate that, and you'd have to write about UDL in your plans and describe how it shows up in your plans and why it matters. It's going to be clearly reflective of students' assets and learning needs. And you can see how much is being asked for here. So you've got to talk about UDL, you've got to talk about assets and learning needs, you have to talk about challenging learning activities, you have to talk about developing academic language, and you have to talk about higher order thinking. You can do all those things. Make yourself a little list, and if you can do these 9, and you can make sure all of those are addressed in your plan too, then a 5 is possible, and I've had students with 5s on this one. So that's rubric 1. And here's evidence where they will find those things. So that means that your written narrative, your lesson plan, all the templates have to be put in good order. You might go back to your templates and use those and use this kind of checklist to see that those things are in your pieces of evidence, your narratives, your templates, your lesson plan. Let's go to step 2, rubric 1.2. This is planning with focus student 1, the English learner. The question is, how does the candidate plan instruction using knowledge of focus student 1's assets and learning needs, this is the English learner, to support meaningful engagement with content-specific learning goals? Again, only focusing on 3. And again, you want to make sure that you're not missing any of these. Missing any of these will make it so you can't possibly have a 3, and you will get a 2. So the musts that I pull out of here, let's read this through first. Candidates' plan supports for student learning are clearly built on focus students 1's assets and learning needs. When you see 2 terms like this, you have to address both of them. Okay? You can't just say assets and learning needs as if they're one conglomeration of something. You got to talk about assets and you have to talk about learning needs. Candidates' plan provides appropriate adaptations or accommodations as needed. Okay? To support focus student 1 to access core content. So this is not just about them feeling good as a student, but how is it related to what's being taught? To support focus student 1's access to core content of the lesson through required reading, writing, listening, or speaking. If they give you these terms, then you should be putting them in there. So my focus student 1 will be reading these and writing about this and listening to this as I'm doing it and talking about this. So if they give you terms like that, that's the way that you key into the requirement for level 3. The next one, candidate provides a cogent rationale in plan for how language adaptations and accommodations used during the lesson encourage focus student 1's progress towards meeting learning goals. So this is all about language in this particular section. So the musts for rubric 1.2, describe how plans work from focus student 1's assets, and it should be assets, not assists, sorry about that. Describe how plans address focus student 1's needs. Do make the distinction. Do have a good conversation with your mentor teacher about these things. Third one, describe how you will adapt the lesson and make accommodations to support focus student 1. And these have to be specific to focus student 1s, not just for everybody. What is it about focus student 1 that you're keying into to support them? And the last one is about language adaptations. Describe your specific approaches to making the language of instruction accessible and understandable to focus student 1. This one's all about language. So remember, 4 things to get a level 3. Now here, level 4 is an easy 1-point gain. Candidate plans opportunities for focus student 1 to participate in different modes of communication. Okay, collaborative, interpretive, and or productive language during the lesson to access content needed to meet learning goals. So this is an easy 1-pointer. Do the first 4, and then here, easy 1-point gain. In your plans, make sure that focus student 1 will be involved in talk, like a pair share, small group discussion, and talking with you as well. And the focus student 1 is supported in during these. All right, so they're not just receptive to the language, they're engaging language to learn as well. So that's an easy 1-point gain for this one. And level 5, this is about UDL strategies again. Create an inclusive environment to support focus student 1's content-specific learning through reading, writing, listening, and or speaking. Candidate's rationale cites evidence-based ELD practices. So to move from a 4 to 5, you're having your student do all that rich engagement in language in multiple ways, and it has some, it's saying again here, reading, writing, listening, or speaking. So if they say reading, writing, listening, or speaking, as we said over here, you want to make sure those are happening. But in this case, in the evidence, you need to talk about ELD standards, ELD approaches. I need to use that term. An ELD approach to supporting students in mathematics, So for this second rubric, your evidence is through narratives, your lesson plan, and lesson plan rationale and materials again. So rubric 1.3, we're still on planning. This is focus student 2 this time, student with identified special needs. Essential question, how does the candidate plan instruction using knowledge of focus student 2's assets and learning needs to support meaningful engagement with the content specific to learning goals? Again, I'm focusing on level 3, and I have 5 things. Even though there's 2 blocks here, I pull out 5 things you should try to work for. The first one, candidates' planned accommodations attend to their IEP 504 GATE goals and identified assets and learning needs between focus student 2's current development or academic abilities and the demands of the lesson. Okay, so hold on to that. And allow focus student 2 to fully access content and meet learning goals. So this is about inclusion. They're not pulled away, they're not separate, they're in the midst, they're part of the lesson. The other part, candidate provides a cogent rationale and plan for scaffolding activities and strategies to accommodate focus students' progress towards meeting learning goals. So I have 5 things for this one. You want to describe the accommodations you're setting up for focus 2's learning needs. Describe how you take into account focus 2's learning assets. And this comes back to focus student 1 again. Focus student 1, focus student 2, focus student 3, it's all about their needs and their assets. You don't want to be focused on how they need stuff and they're broken and what's wrong with them. You want to say what's going to help them move to the next place in their learning, including and incorporating the good things they bring to their learning already. So assets is very important. Make sure that's clear. And then you also want to make sure you're attending to the goals and the IEP 504 GATE goals. That means you have to set them out in your writing. So in your writing somewhere, make sure you have focus student 2's goals and their 504 plan are such and such and such and such, and I'm paying attention to them in this way. Okay. The next one is about full inclusion. How are you involving them in the class in a way that acknowledges who they are and how they learn, but also fully. So they're working with the same kinds of ideas and problems and questions that you're setting up for everybody, and you're supporting them in that. The last one is describe why your scaffolds are particularly relevant for focus student 2. As you're fully including them in the lesson, how are you making sure that they can be involved in a way that matters through the scaffolds you offer them? Okay, so those are the 5 things I suggest for this one. Level 4, easy 1 point again. Whenever you see an easy 1 point, go for it, because then that'll make up for any points you might lose elsewhere. Okay. Level 3 plus, candidate articulates how plans build on focus students' assets and learning needs. All right, so do that, as I've said over here. There's a difference, let me make sure there's a difference between the two. In level 3, it's attending to their assets and learning needs. So make the difference. Attending to. So in your write-up, if you say, I'm attending to their assets and learning needs, it's a level 3. In your writing, if you say, I'm building on their assets and learning needs, and you give good explanation on how you're building on their assets and learning needs, then you can move up to a level 4, I'm sorry. Easy 1-point gain, focus on focus student 2 is capable learner, and address how you will use their strengths and interests to promote their learning. Okay. For level 5, candidate plans a lesson using UDL framework again. And a big piece of this one is this last piece, is how are they a part of the whole class community? If you're moving towards level 5, do describe that. Make it clear that you understand them as part of the whole community, that they're an integral part of it, and not just separate and different. And the rationale cites evidence-based practices. So this is, like Focus Student 1 asks you to think about ELD, this is asking you to talk about practices relevant to IEP 504 GATE students, right? In your planning, describe how you will bring Focus Student 2 in the learning community as an engaged, contributing learner, and then cite evidence about practices that do that kind of work. And again, the same kinds of evidence, your written narratives, your lesson plan, and your instructional materials. Last one for planning, and this is Focus Student 3. 1.4 rubric. How does the candidate plan instruction using knowledge of Focus Student 3's assets and learning needs to support meaningful engagement with a content-specific lesson, goals, and address the student's well-being by creating a safe and positive learning environment during or outside of the lesson? Okay. So here's level 3. Candidates plan activity strategies and assessments during or outside the lesson are designed to provide a safe and positive learning environment, promote Focus Student 3's well-being, and support Focus Student 3's progress toward the content-specific learning goals. I put 2 things here. In your plan, give specific examples of moves, activities, and strategies that will set up a good space for your students to learn. Include how you will group or have your students share, your expectations or engagement, pacing, and appropriate use of materials. Now this is for the whole class, okay? But this is really needing to be about Focus Student 3. So I have down here, do describe Focus Student 3's needs and the specific things you will do for them to be positively and productively engaged. Avoid negative talk about Focus Student 3. Focus on strengths and needs. All right? And a little bit more might be that you're focusing on their well-being. So that's one piece of it. Focus on well-being, but also moving towards their learning. So it can't be just about how they're going to be discomfortable in the classroom. It also has to be about how you're moving them in their learning too. So there might be 3 things here. Level 4, candidate articulates how plans build on Focus Student 3's assets and learning needs. Again, this is not about attending to, but about building on. And then why the lesson is likely to be responsive to Focus Student 3's life experiences. Again, this is another easy 1-point gain. Frame every activity you set out in terms of how it will positively engage Focus Student 3 based on their assets and their needs. How will Focus Student 3 be better for the specific attention you give these in your lesson? And describe how your plans address Focus Student 3's life experience. There's a lot of stuff going on here, but this is again holding Focus Student 3 is capable and how you're going to support them in their learning. Level 5 is about UDL again, inclusive environment, and again about being part of the whole class community. And then the other part of this is about evidence-based practices again. So you have to give evidence. Focus Student 1, Focus Student 2, and Focus Student 3. To have a level 5, you need to give evidence from frameworks of teaching for English learners, for students on plans, and students who come to the learning differently. To move to a 5, you will have to do more than just describe how you are working to best teach Focus Student 3. You will have to describe in your plans how Focus Student 3 will be involved in shared work as part of the learning community, pair, share, group work discussion. So it's not about isolating them and fixing them. It's about how are they a part of all things, and then giving some evidence for why that's a good way to go. And then again, the same kinds of requirements here: written narrative, lesson plan, instructional materials. So those are the first 4 rubrics, and those are all about planning. So now we're going to get to step 2, and that's teach and assess. So this is rubric 1.5. And there's a lot here because this is a meaty part of the whole assessment. So let's get to it. Essential question. How does the candidate establish clear learning expectations based on an understanding of learning students' prior knowledge and maintain a positive and safe learning environment that supports all students to assess and meet the content-specific learning goals? Okay, so this is all about learning expectations. Again, level 3 we're focusing on. Candidate sets learning expectations during the lesson, directly connects lessons to prior learning of the content, and explains how this lesson fits into a larger unit of instruction. There's 3 things here: setting the instruction, setting the expectations, connecting to prior learning, and how this matters to a bigger thing. So you have to do all 3 of these. Next bit. Candidates' annotations explain how a positive and safe learning environment was established. Well, this goes to your annotations from your video, just like you're talking about how everybody was in a good place to be learning. Next one, candidate uses strategies seen in video that support students to assess, access, and meet content-specific learning goals. All right, so let's see what we have here. As I put here, important, evidence must be described in your annotations. All of these things are about your annotations. Musts, 5 things. At the beginning of your lesson, you must set both learning and engagement expectations. So not just what they're going to learn, but how they're going to go about their learning. At the beginning of your lesson, you must explicitly talk about and connect students to the learning that came before the lesson. Okay, that's what we have here. During the lesson, and especially in the closure, you must talk about how this lesson is important to something bigger and tell students what will come next. That's that piece. In your annotations, give attention to setting expectations, positively redirecting students to participate, sharing that makes a learning community, positive comments on your part. Okay, so this is this part, positive learning, safe learning environment. Annotate all the times you check for understanding and use that check to support students to better understanding. Annotate specific teaching moves that push student thinking and engagement, higher order thinking. All right, so that needs to be in there. That's one of the annotations you have, is like higher order thinking here. So that's all level 3. Level 4, 1-point gain. Annotate using creating positive environments. So whenever you do this one, you have 4 different kinds of annotations you might set out. To move from level 3 to 4, candidates and students interact with each other through questioning and conversation that demonstrate positive and respectful rapport with each other and reinforce deep learning of content. So when you are annotating, think about this part and how you would describe that. In this conversation we're having amongst ourselves in the class, the kids are asking good questions. I've asked it to, so you can imagine how you do the annotation to show this. Okay. So what did I write here? Another easy 1-point gain. Annotate using creative positive environment, all the productive shared talk and activity. Annotate using higher order thinking, all instances of rich talk and discussion, as well as student immersion in activity. Okay, so those 2 things. There's 2 annotations, creating positive environment, higher order thinking. Those will all help you with this one. So level 5, candidate demonstrates and explains how and why the UDL strategy is used to establish an inclusive environment that supports all students to learn and how these strategies provide an equitable access to content. So this is another note, the same thing. Wherever you have an opportunity to use the annotation, creating positive environment, you do that all the times when you pull your students together to discuss, share, think about the content. Okay, so that's inclusive environment. As you work to be inclusive and equitable in who participates. Anytime you're bringing kids together for things, think about creating positive environment and how that fits with this whole thing about creating equitable access to content. So that's 1.5. And now this is still teach and assess. This is 1.6. And you can see that this one's quite a thick one. Let's get started on it. Teach and assess. How does the candidate actively engage students in deep learning, always higher order thinking, of content, and monitor, assess their understanding, and establish next steps for learning? There are 3 pieces here. One is deep learning of content. Second one is monitor and assess. And the third one is establish next steps for learning. So there's a lot in this one. So if we look at level 3, we're ignoring that 1 and 2. Candidates instruction and assessment requires students to engage in higher order thinking, deep learning. Okay, so that's going to be the first one. All right, so we got the deep learning here. Candidate monitors student learning to check for understanding. That's the second piece here. And the third one is provides next steps for learning. So we got all 3 of them there. And as I write over here, there are 3 things. Instruction and assessment must both engage students in higher order thinking. For instruction, make sure that your work from a good, rich, focused question gives students opportunities to work out a problem, present their own thinking, and involve talk, pair shares, and discussion. Okay, so that's the first part. For assessment, make sure that your prompts and questions have enough room for students to express how they are thinking, offer them connections to other important things, and allow them to pull together their learning in some kind of synthesis. That's all higher order thinking here. Next part. You should specifically annotate all the instances where you pause to check in on how your kids are doing, every question you ask to see what they are thinking, and more formal moves, exit ticket quizzes, closing talk. All of these are not incidental, so if you stop and just listen to kids, make sure you've annotated it for a check for understanding. Okay? And with every check-in, annotate as check for understanding and higher order thinking. So you can do more that you can annotate them with more than one thing. Every instance where you give students feedback or direction, so use both of these, check for understanding, higher order thinking. Every instance where you give students feedback or direction to move them a little bit further. Describe these as giving next steps for learning. So any kind of feedback, you could be doing this next, is also a way of giving a next step for learning. Also annotate your closing comments where you tell students what will be coming next in the lesson. So that's the next steps for learning as well. Okay, so there's a lot in this one. For level 4, Candidates instruction and assessment provide students opportunities to actively develop their own understandings linked to lesson goals. That's kind of vague, but it's okay. This is the part that probably matters more. Candidate monitors student learning throughout the lesson and adjusts instruction for the whole class. So it needs to be evident that you're always checking on their learning, but also that as a result of those checks that you might change a question, you might give a different bit of information, anything you might do in response to what they've told you or shown you. I put make sure students are doing this for themselves, give them opportunities to work things out, materials for them to work with, opportunities to work with each other, avoid hand-holding and step-by-step instruction. How are your students in charge of their own learning? The second, purposely note how you positively and productively adjusted your teaching in response to your checks for understanding. Okay, so that's to move to a 4. Level 5, Candidates instruction assessments promote inclusion for all students, providing opportunities to participate in classroom discourse as members of the community. This is why discussions and talk are so important across this. That's the way we know what kids are thinking. Those are the places where higher order thinking may come in. Talk is also the place where you get to assess and see what their thinking is about, so you might make adjustments. So you want to have places where kids are talking, interacting in ways that you can do something, in ways in which you can do something with. So the other part, students independently facilitate their own work, either in whole class, small group, or individually choosing how to advance their learning. Okay, moves to level 5 always involve inclusive teaching practice. So across all these rubrics, how are people involved as a community with each other, supporting and moving each other learning, where it's not all teacher-directed. Use the creating positive environment annotation to focus on how you brought students together to share in their learning with you and with each other. And this does include your work to ensure that independent work is productive. This happens from your clear expectations for engagement and access to material. So as you're setting them out to work independently, remember it's a result of your clear expectations. So use that annotation, okay, setting expectations, and then the kids are working well on their own. It's because you set out clear expectations. We're almost there. This is 1.7, so now we're moving out of teach and assess. We're at rubric 3, which is reflect. How does the candidate analyze and describe the impact of their asset and needs-based lesson planning, teaching, and assessment of student learning? Explain how the lesson supports the whole class and 3 focus students. And I've highlighted the pieces you need to pay attention to. Candidate connects the importance of knowing students' assets and learning needs to student learning. Hold on to that. This is where you're showing that, yes, it was good that I learned a lot about my students before I planned and before I taught them. And analyzes and describes how knowing this information can lead to the development of instruction that is supporting, engaging, and challenging to learners. So knowing all that stuff, how did your lesson become better to support, engage, and challenge them? And then you have to break it down for the whole class and the 3 focus students. So what I wrote here is important. This rubric is all about your written narrative, reflection on what you learned. So all points come from that. So you want to make sure you've done a really good job with that. I put down 4 musts here. Write about how your preparation beforehand to really know your students, and in particular their assets and learning needs, set you up in your planning and shaped your teaching. Write about how this kind of knowledge sets you up for future meaningful, engaging teaching that will matter to your students. So it's not just about that you did this great, pay attention to my kids, learn about them, and I taught this great lesson. How is this a practice that teachers should have all the time, and how does that matter? How is that going to matter to your teaching in the long run? Why should this be a part of your good teaching, to really know your students and work from what they come with? Then the last part, you want to break it down again. Write about how this knowledge matters to teaching a whole class, do a paragraph, and write about how this knowledge mattered to your teaching of each of your focus students. And again, I'm going to suggest a paragraph for each. Don't clump them together. Okay? This matters because the knowledge I gained for focus student 1 allowed me to such and such and such and such. And in the future, when I work with English learners, this will help me, da-da-da-da-da. Okay, so to move to a level 4, you need to provide a clear rationale for how and why adaptations to instruction were made or not made during the lesson to meet the whole class, group, and or individual student needs. So this asks you to be purposefully self-critical of your teaching, not to be judgmental. Don't say that you did a bad lesson. Just say, I would have, I might have, these are things I need to think about. But you need to reflect and improve. This is all about improving and reflecting on your teaching. So again, with evidence, choose episodes where your teaching move made a difference for your students. What made it work? So a question, a prompt, a bit of modeling. What did it do to move your students' learning? And you can find that in the evidence in your videos. Choose episodes where you could have done a little better. Describe this, why this should be done better based on your students' response. So you might have given some instruction to a child and they began doing something, but it becomes clear that they don't quite get it. You'll have to adjust your instruction, but you might ask yourself, what might I have done differently in that moment? And that might be the evidence that you provide in this narrative. And level 5, again, UDL, supporting individual learning differences, working towards an inclusive classroom, and the idea that you're analyzing your planning to get better at things. For level 5, you need to describe how your flexibility in instruction purposefully makes it so that your students get what they need. So this is adjusting instruction along the way, etc. Taking into account who they are and their different ways of learning, while bringing all students together in shared learning endeavor. So this is asking a lot, okay? So you need to know who they all are, but you also need to know how to bring them all together. You need to know how each of them is in their learning and their assets and needs, and also how to bring them all together in learning. Okay, so that's a bit of teacher nirvana, something to work towards. And this is the last one. This is apply. Essential question. How will the candidate apply what they have learned in Cycle 1 about students' learning to strengthen and extend students' understanding of content and develop academic language and determine next steps for instruction? Okay, so this is what you've learned, but then you have to pay attention to these pieces. Strengthen and extend students' understanding of content. Okay. Develop academic language. That's the second piece. And the third piece is determine next steps for instruction. So there's 3 parts here. So let's see what they have for level 3 here. Candidate applies what they have learned to describe future instruction for students that is designed to strengthen and extend deep content and academic language development for all students. So a suggestion is you need to be using these ideas in your writing. strengthen and extend content learning, and academic language development for all students. Right? So there's a lot here, and it's all about future instruction. The words that are here are guides for how you should be thinking about your presentation. Second piece, Kennedy provides next steps for instruction, citing evidence of student learning assessed during the lesson. This is why you need to have some artifact, something they've written, something they've done, something you can see in the video that they've done so that you can say what next steps should happen. So, important, this rubric is all about the application of what you've learned template. So everything has to sit in that template with lots and lots of evidence again. 5 things I set out. You must describe what teaching should follow your lesson. Could be specific or general. So what's the future instruction? You must describe how that instruction will strengthen student understanding and deepen content learning. So this is where you need to be working the higher order thinking part again. Okay? How are you going to keep moving in that direction? You must describe how that future lesson will address, deepen, extend academic language. Start by referring to the attention to academic language in your own lesson, in your lesson plan as well. So we got 2 things here. One is the higher order thinking. Okay, got to say what's going on with that, what will happen in that, how are you going to move forward in higher order thinking, and how will you move forward in academic language. Those both have to be addressed in order to get a 3. You must set out specific next steps for instruction, building on what you did in the lesson you just taught. Okay, so provides next steps for instruction, and all of that has to be built on what students showed you during your lesson. You must use assessment evidence. Think about moments caught on video, checks for understanding, student work to justify what you believe should be next in instruction. So you can say, I will be teaching this next. This next lesson will be such and such and such and such. But if you don't say, I'm doing this lesson because in the lesson I just taught, my students really understood this, but they needed some help with this. As you can see in this video portion right here, you need to have the evidence. Just make sure you have evidence for why you're moving forward or what direction you might take the lesson in next. So that's level 3. Level 4. Kennedy describes targeted instructional adaptations to support, strengthen, or extend whole class, group, or individual learning needs during future lessons. Okay, so when they say targeted instructional adaptations, you need to give evidence again about who and why. Okay. On what your students did in your lesson, give specific evidence again. So I'm going to give this targeted. I had a group of students when they were doing this math problem, all had this kind of place where the problem solving got a little confused. What are you going to do for them? Okay. Address individual needs for future lessons. Consider your 3 focus students. In fact, this is probably a really good idea. If you were to go ahead and say for focus student 1, I will do this, focus student 2, I would do this, and focus student 3, I would do this, it probably moves you to a 4. Remember, you have to have all of these before you get any of these. And the last one, level 5, Kennedy describes in detail how to support all students in an inclusive, safe, and positive learning environment through UDL principles. This is about inclusion again. As I said before, level 5 is all about class, community, and inclusion. All right. Explaining what steps they will take to ensure that all students are welcome to be part of the class, community, and discourse. Second part, candidates' response demonstrates that they understand all students can learn when assets and learning needs are the focus of instruction. And they're giving you a template right there too. You should say somewhere how you believe that all students can be, how your teaching will support all students in the future based on the learning needs and assets, and why that is such an important way to think about your teaching. So I wrote down here, how will you work in your future lessons to bring your students together in their learning as a community, and share your belief in the potential of all students when working from an understanding of their needs and assets. So those are the 2 things I suggest you do to move to level 5. So I've gone through all 8 of the rubrics. Main things to hold on to: you have to work from all the requirements in level 3. I've highlighted them in color. You might make some kind of check-off sheet for yourself. You might use this as a kind of list for yourself when you go through your materials. Have I done this? Have I done this? Have I done this? Do pay attention to the moves that would take you easily to level 4 or to 5. And you might think of some particular things at level 4 and level 5. Level 4 is always about building on assets and learning needs. And level 5 is always about inclusion. So if you think about running those threads through all of your work, you can possibly move a number of your level 3s up to 4 and 5 just by doing that. So I hope this has been helpful to you. And that's it.